And I know several of you participated in elected official workshops and have had participated in other meetings and background on Reimagine DART. So I appreciate the time and effort everybody, all of our member communities are putting into learning about what we're trying to do here and where we're going. I have with me today Erin Hockman, who is our Chief Strategy Officer. I may occasionally call on her if there's a question I don't know the answer to. And then Ricky Angera with Jarrett Walker and Associates will be presenting on the concepts that we have and the implications for Des Moines and your residents. I want to start with a little bit of background information, including some information, updated information on ridership, and some updated information on budget scenarios that we're looking at, and then I'll pass it off to Ricky. So again, ridership trends, budget, and then Ricky will have the bulk of the presentation on the concepts we have. So one of the questions we always get from you, I know you're going to look at the map and go, I want the numbers. The numbers are on the next slide. So just know that. One of the questions we're always getting is, where are people getting on and off the bus? And what is our ridership looking like? What is the state fare? What is DMPS? So we have looked at our we looked at the average weekday boardings, and this map shows you that, and the next map will show the FY24 ridership as a whole. So again, you can see where those boardings are happening the most. A lot of people will ask me, well, where do they get off? We do have a lighting information. I will say it's not as perfect because of how it's done, but I think the biggest thing to remember here is that if someone's getting off the bus, they're usually getting back on the bus in the same location. And so really where those large dots are both the boardings and the lightings. So if you look, someone's going to Merle Hay Mall to work, they have a boarding at Dart Central Station, they get off at Merle Hay Mall, then we have a boarding at Merle Hay Mall. And so if we look at where those big dots are, those are where the bulk of both the boardings and the lightings are at. If we look at ridership trends, so looking at over the years here, you can see that in FY24, 63% of the total boardings were in Des Moines. That is excluding DMPS and excluding the Iowa State Fair. You can see on these maps here that blue is Des Moines boardings, brown is DMPS boardings, gray is boardings outside of Des Moines, and yellow is our Iowa State Fair boardings. So I know you guys have been looking for that. I hope, Councilman Gatto, that addresses some of the questions you have had. And again, we believe the whole system, each piece works well, it works together, and we need all of these things. The Iowa State Fair, is a benefit to our economy in a lot of ways. The State Fair has actually asked us to provide more service that we're unable to do because we don't have enough buses. And so they're looking at other options for that, but we know parking and other things continue to be a challenge there. All of it is a part of what we're trying to provide to the region, but want to be clear on what's happening in Des Moines.
Just real quick, a question for you. I mean, 20% Des Moines Public Schools, are those on already fixed routes that we have, or are they other?
Both.
Okay.
So Des Moines Public Schools decides who is assigned to a DART bus. And then those students, based on where they're living, are either assigned to a standard fixed route. So if we take the Route 7 going down Southwest 9th, some students are assigned to the Route 7. Then we have deviation routes, 7A, 7B, 7C, that go into neighborhoods, and some kids are assigned to those routes. And so it is a mix. It is all middle schoolers and high schoolers, and we are having conversations as they reimagine DMPS about where they're going to want us to serve the most and where they pick up the service. And really, a lot of it is going to come back to those key corridors, right, where we have Southwest 9th. Lincoln's going to be there, and we're going to always have a lot of people on that corridor. So I don't see that one going away. It might change, but not go away. It is important to note as we think about DMPS that there are a lot of intersections here. The service concepts we're presenting to you today are based on our hours and miles of service, not including DMPS, and so we aren't working the system right now around DMPS. So the choices you make around ridership and coverage do have an impact on what we can do for DMPS, because what we do is based off that core network. So happy to explain more. They are serving on our cabinet as well, Matt Smith and Sam Sonishin from their transportation department, to make sure that we're considering the students in all of this. service. But again, we have been asked to look at first the core network, and DMPS gets.
So they obviously don't have enough yellow buses to go into the neighborhood. I just don't see a lot of dark buses in neighborhoods picking.
And we don't want to do as much neighborhood
Right.
service. We do a few, but not as much. It's really, and it's where can we avoid duplication,
Yeah.
right? We don't want yellow buses going where we're already going.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Aaron, quick question. What's the term that, I'm sorry, not Aaron, but Amanda.
It's okay.
What's the term that you used for where people get off the bus?
And alighting, ALIGHTING, alighting.
Yeah, Amanda, real quick, the 2020 numbers,
Yeah.
that would have had partial COVID impact.
It would have
So it was
had partial
19.
COVID. So we are, as a region, at about 80% of pre-COVID numbers. So COVID, pre-COVID, the high was a little over 4 million. We're about 80%. We'll tell you, and Ricky can speak to it too, we have recovered faster than a lot of other transit agencies. We're in the top of agencies that have recovered, and so I think it does show how much people are depending on it. Even during COVID, if you look at our worst, even during COVID, we still had 5,000 to 6,000 rides a day, and that was when we were asking people not to ride the bus. So it was really people who had to use it to get to work in those days. So again, today is all.
Annette, this is Mike.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike. Or sorry,
This
Councilman.
is Mike Simonson. Yeah, can you repeat, or maybe you didn't give this number, but certainly we're interested in understanding how the suburbs are today using the system. If you were to remove Des Moines Public Schools from the equation to better understand the numbers, what percentage of ridership is starting in Des Moines?
63%, removing DMPS and the Iowa State Fair, 63% of boardings are in Des Moines. And again, so we can assume, say we have a West Des Moines resident who's coming to Des Moines, they're going to board at Jordan Creek Mall, and we'll have a boarding at Jordan Creek Mall and a lighting at Dart Central Station. They'll work downtown or wherever they're working, and then they'll get back on at Dart Central Station, board there, and a light at Jordan Creek. And vice versa. I know we've had a lot of conversations. We know people are getting on in Des Moines and going to the suburbs. And so we can see that someone might get on the bus at Dart Central Station, and then they're going to Jordan Creek Mall to work. Then we have another boarding at Jordan Creek. So again, the boardings and the lightings really give us where those big pockets of people are, but 63% boardings in Des Moines.
I just thought of a new
I'm encouraged that 37% are outside of Des Moines.
And not totally, because DMPS, and you can see in this chart, and Councilman, I know you're on the phone, so we will be sharing this with you, because you can see in the chart, a large percentage then, 20%-ish, are DMPS. So then you get to about 83% between DMPS and Des Moines. So if we really look at, and then if we take out Iowa State Fair, total boardings in the suburbs are less than 20%.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, less than 10%, yeah.
Maybe it'd be helpful if Aaron could send this presentation to Chris and Mike so they
Yes.
can see it as we go through it.
Yeah.
or watch it on YouTube as well. Just thought of this. So the boardings at your downtown location would also be included here, right?
Yep.
Do you have any way of understanding how many there are transferring versus that's their final destination and then they walk into downtown from there?
I am not sure that we have a great way of looking at that. Ricky, do you know from your data perspective?
I think you may have some of it from people that use passes and they can actually log in information, but
Yeah.
you can't get it from everyone because you won't capture that with cache. So you
Right.
capture some of it, but not all of it.
Okay. Just something to think about.
Yeah, and we can look at what the total number of boardings at Dart Central Station are, and, I think we could draw some conclusions from that of how many are transfers. But again, that doesn't necessarily tell you if the person got on at Merle Hay Mall and transferred to go to Kemen. So it doesn't, that's the challenge. I know we never can quite get to.
But it is the spoke and hub system, so just understanding that a little better might be helpful.
Yeah.
And so Councilman Boss and the mayor and I were at a neighborhood meeting last night, and they talked a little bit about Des Moines Public Schools and how they're taking the bus down to the central again and It hasn't probably been a real, I think it was the police that actually.
Yeah, and that's,
Yeah, and just kind of hanging out there and then going into,
Yeah.
and that was happening a few years ago with the Wednesday early out. And
that's-
so now we're kind of back at that.
Yep, and that is why we also changed the start time for unlimited access to 4:30. So students who don't have access to DART for school are not allowed to ride before 4:30 PM. That goal is to get everybody home before they're starting to get it. Now, they can pay to ride the bus, and I will tell you, this is a point of challenge for our operators as well. It's a huge benefit and it's a huge challenge. And we're not the only transit system. I've talked with a lot of other transit CEOs on this because we know we've got to get students to education. We also know lots of students together, unsupervised, can create some challenges as well. We really focus at DART Central Station and we appreciate the partnership we have with DMPD. A lot of where our off-duty DMPD work for us is during those hours. But one thing we've talked a lot about, and I think both the schools and us have an interest in, but neither of us have the resources for, are additional adults to ride or be with groups of students. We try at DART Central Station, if someone is sitting there for more than a half hour or so, we try and have a conversation. Where are you going? What's your next bus? We want to make sure people are getting on a bus and not just loitering. But you can imagine that's not always an easy thing. People know what to tell us. So.
Do you see them, I know when Councilmember Mandelbaum and I rode that same Southwest 9th bus, we went down there, and we watched them all just go into downtown, the entire bus. Is that what you're seeing? Where
I don't think I have good enough.
Getting a bus and going somewhere else?
We see both.
Okay.
We see both, and I don't think without a specific watching and counting and looking,
got you.
I can't say for sure, but we see both. We see kids that are just heading home. We see kids that are going somewhere in downtown. We really don't know.
Thank you.
So getting into Reimagine DART, a couple of the reasons for where we are, Des Moines has always been a part of the MTA and a part of DART in 2006. And then when DART Central Station was built in 2012, that is really when our current network was formed. And we've made changes and we've tried some new things. We've added the 50, the Euclid Crosstown. We're testing DART on demand. And I know we'll be talking more about microtransit. We've certainly adapted to meet needs, but I do think there is a time in any organization where you need to step back and take a fresh look. And I think between the conversations we're having regionally, as well as really looking at how our communities have changed. And I moved here 11 years ago, and I can tell you, you all know it's just changed a lot in that time. In addition, how people are traveling has changed. And that is one thing you'll see we're really trying to address in this is we are seeing that people need to travel more in the midday and weekends. We used to really focus more on the white-collar commuter coming into downtown, and that isn't what current ridership is looking like and where the needs are. And so we believe that, again, we need to look at the whole system because it all ties together. In addition, we know the reality of limited resources that we're all facing, and I'll talk in a minute about the budget decisions. And certainly that's not the only reason we're looking at this, but we want to make sure we're providing the best possible service with the resources we are given. So as the commission considers some of the decisions ahead of them, they will be giving some feedback to staff at a May 6th meeting and then taking a vote on the at a special May 19th meeting on these two questions. How much transit system can the region afford, and how do we allocate the resources we have? And Ricky is going to be talking all about the allocation and the mapping and how we approach that. I want to give you a little bit more information on the budget. So we started with what is a status quo budget, meaning if we have the same hours and miles of service, we might change where they're run, we might change the size of the bus, we might change if it's on demand, but the biggest cost for us is the operator, the fuel, those components. So that's how we look at it, is our hours and miles of service. So if we were to maintain those hours and miles of service, what would that take? And we have forecasted that out 5 years, which I'll be showing you in the slides to come. Then we have a smaller network, which is, okay, we know with the financial realities, we might not be able to keep what we have as much as I want to, and as much as I'll say we have not grown to keep up with the region. That is part of the reason you all and we all get requests for things we can't do. And so the smaller network is hard, but we also know we have to have something that's sustainable for our community. After that, we were asked to build a kind of in-between scenario, and then the legislative property tax bill, as it currently stands, has a big implication, likely meaning 30 to 40% cuts. We're having conversations. I want to be cautiously optimistic. I also don't know how that will turn out. So the legislature may end up making that decision for the commission, because if the legislature does what they have planned, the commission's hands will be tied in terms of what they're able to do. But if we aren't affected by that, then the commission will be voting on these options. And we focused today for you on the status quo and the smaller network. Again, there are those other two scenarios, but we wanted to be able to, and the mayor and Scott asked us to really look at some specific numbers around the franchise fee, all of those, and that you're considering, how much we expect to get in property taxes. Again, all of these are very rough. And I'll say, you will notice every time, we run updated forecasts. We know what the legislature is going to do is going to affect how much we collect in property taxes. We just can't forecast how. So that property tax number might change. What you all decide to do with the franchise fee is a component as well. But this does lay out the differences between those two options. And with all of these, I will say, as we have looked to the future, one of the things to remember is that the property tax levy is our only tool. And so all of our wages and insurance and all those things go on to that one tool locally. And I shouldn't say it's the only tool, it's the only local tool besides the franchise fee. Is part of why I will and we will continue to advocate. We believe we should have a different tool. We believe we should have a region-wide tool. But we have what we have now, and we also know we're not going to get the legislature to give us something else unless we're all working together as a region. And that's part of this effort too, is having a region that is working together so that someday we can get what we need at the Capitol, but we'll need our suburbs and Des Moines to all be part of working together on that. So with that, we have worked on and are looking at a 4% annual expense growth. Again, 65-ish% of our budget is people. We just negotiated a new contract with our ATU union. I'm very proud of what the team did on that. We were able to keep that under 4%, which these days is pretty good, and pretty good from a cost perspective. We were also able to do things too, obviously we want to retain employees. And so we were able to do some things in terms of sick time and other components to make sure that we continue to be attractive for our employees as well. But we are doing what we can to maintain costs, but that 4% with what inflation and wages and everything are doing is really what we look at needing for the status quo, and that means a 5% increase in property taxes. So that's why you see those numbers you do in the status quo. The smaller network does a one-time reduction and then looks at it for 5 years. So there's a one-time reduction in FY27, then we look at those same increases starting again in FY28 and forecasting that out 5 years. So I know there's a lot of numbers here. And again, I will say, these are estimates. I know there's updated franchise fee information and that changes, but happy to take questions.
I guess the biggest thing that sticks out, the smaller network, you're putting more from reserve funds than you would in the status quo. And
no, that's what you have we forecast what you'd have in your reserve from the franchise fee, because you'd be collecting more. If you did a 2.5%.
And when does this start? Because if we did a...
Yeah, depending. Aaron, do you know when we started on it?
I guess I'm confused.
So if we actually start the franchise fee
In sooner.
FY26, so if we start it now, there would be another potentially 3 million in reserve.
Yes, and we didn't model that because again, didn't want to
Right. So
assume.
So we would have the reserve, and that those red numbers in the status quo would go away if we actually started in FY26.
Yes, because if you started in FY26 and you've committed to giving 2 million of that, and then, if you collect more than 2 million, you would end up with some in reserves, yes.
Right. If we did
That's a full
thing,
network.
we'd collect a little over 6.
Yeah.
So we'd have 4 million added to reserves.
Yep.
So that would be our reserves, not your.
It's your reserves, yep, to be used for transit or property tax reduction.
That's where I was confused.
Yeah.
Right. So that would provide another 2.5 years before.
Yeah, I haven't run the numbers, but it'd give you some time.
Their numbers don't quite add up, so there must be something just slightly on the totals under the smaller network?
The totals is what Des Moines' contribution would be. Sorry, where are you not seeing? And again, I
I'm
will say
guessing
we
there,
did-
it might actually just be a rounding. So let's go with 28 on the smaller unit, 9.5 plus 7.1 of franchise fee.
16.7.
Yeah.
Yep. We've got a rounding error there. And again, I'll say we were running these numbers Tuesday after we'd met, so
Yeah.
okay.
we'll confirm that. You're right, that doesn't add up correctly.
So I'm trying to figure out what,
The bottom row is the total contribution that Des Moines would be assigned through the formula for each of those networks. But they're not necessarily going to add up because between the property tax and the franchise fee, you're collecting more revenue than is needed. And that's where that,
so the 2.5% franchise fee line is the
It's what-
total collection.
Yes, thank you,
Of
Aaron.
franchise fee, but only a portion of that is needed in that year
Yes.
for that cost.
Thank you.
And that's why if you look in the smaller network, the reserve number goes up.
Yeah.
So the contribution adds up.
Yeah, so I can see you might want a line that's what's the difference each year, right? What's the difference each year?
that it was just too much to fit.
No, I understand. That's why I asked the question. I figured the end numbers, the totals are correct then, the 12.8 million, the 14.4. You feel pretty good about those are the contributions, and we can back into that with these numbers. Okay.
Yeah, and again, we don't know what the property tax bill will do, right? We've talked about how the homestead exemption could affect us and you, or, a variety of things.
Yeah,
So.
but the big one is the 2%.
2%.
Without growth.
The 2% growth is the big one if that applies to us. But even if they let us out of that, if there's those other components of how TIF, homestead, and other things are handled that affect what we can collect, it'll change the property tax contribution. So there are multiple ways that this will impact us.
Agreed.
So as I look at this, the status quo, even with the 2.5%, and we've talked about this before, it's not sustainable. I mean, within 5 years, we need additional contributions.
Yep, and like we've talked about too, it is, again, we're only factoring in that 4% growth. It is that we're halfway through the formula implementation. FY29 is the last year of the formula implementation. But you can see 4.5%, even after that implementation is complete, is still about $800,000 a year, from that increases for this.
And remind me of the formula. So the formula, as we increase our contributions, some of the
Yeah.
other members decrease their contribution. Is that correct, how the formula?
Yeah, and I have another slide, and I could send it as a follow-up too, that shows that getting to the formula, again, there are, I know there's an interest in revisiting the formula. And again, different member communities have different perspectives on that, so I don't want to be in the spot of saying what everybody wants. We have made clear with the commission that we will need to revisit the tiers. So again, to go back to how the formula works is that off the top, Des Moines would pay 49.2%. So you think of those boardings in Des Moines being 63%. Essentially, at that time, what the suburbs viewed as their support for the system was that difference between the 49% and the 63%. And so that is, or we've used 70. Again, there's a lot of ways to look at the numbers. We use hours and miles. Again, I shouldn't confuse the two because we aren't using ridership, but we use hours and miles of service. That is what was determined to be used because that is how cost is allocated as well. And so then Des Moines pays, when the formula is completely implemented in FY29, Des Moines would pay 49.2% off the top. Then the other members have a split between them of a 50% population and 50% tier of service. And those tiers of service will change with this redesign because, for example, you'll see some don't have, one, you'll see we don't have on-demand in here. And so that is a component as well that was not there when we created this formula. In addition, you'll see that we're looking at trying to do a far more 7-day-a-week service to meet needs. So we might not have communities that fit in the 5-day. They might. So we will need to figure that out alongside the draft network. So we do have worked into the plan that the commission will be revisiting those tiers in the late summer, early fall, so that as the commission is looking at a draft plan, we're talking about the tiers, and then as they looked at adopting that plan in December, there's alignment on that. And so, I've asked Mayor Bozen if there's a desire to revisit other parts of that to let our commission know that so that we can have those conversations at the same time.
And I think that based on if we do the franchise that we have said, as I've heard from many of you, that not only is the tier, which I think is going to automatically be because of how the service, but also some form of the governance.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, is we pay 49%, we're still equal with, Windsor Heights or Altoona as far
You do
as-
have a weighted vote. I mean, that is, but
If you call for a weighted.
if you call for a weighted vote, no one has ever used that, I'll say. But we have a weighted vote. But that is some of the, and to be, frank, it comes back to some of where we were in the fall. And that is where some of our suburban membership, as you know, is very precarious. And the suburban membership is helping Des Moines. And so, there is a downside and some balance of, I know the mayor as chair is really trying to, keep everybody together and also figure out how we do this for the long term. But I think your council being clear on what you're looking for in terms of that clarity would really help sooner rather than later. I think before the May budget, like here's what we want, or here's at least what we want to discuss.
I think it's more, I think we just need to have that discussion because it's been brought up. And I think it's based on the 2.5%, the additional dollars coming in, and that's where we'll.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's difficult. If I was in their position and I had already had Des Moines vote to lower my property tax levy, I'm probably not going to turn around and say, okay, you can raise it again, since Des Moines already voted once to agree to that.
Well, and I would say
Moines
again,
now.
that is trying to keep everybody together and align cost and benefit. Because I can tell you, I presented to the Ankeny City Council, and they look at how much they're contributing versus how much service they have, and they feel that it's very out of whack. And so that is the fine balance of, that we have to consider is, and why it was decided is trying to align the cost and the benefit. And so I think the suburbs would say that they've been overpaying and now they're getting it right. Again, I don't want to speak for others, but that's where those perspectives. Yeah.
I think those are just the discussions that we have to have ongoing, especially when we just determine what the routes are going to be.
Yeah.
Because things could change based on how service is given.
Yep. So, happy to get into that because that is the bulk of our conversation.
Why don't we get into,
So in the
Can I make two comments?
population.
Hold on.
So in the tier 5 population, so now some of these cities have decided they're going to drop out though, right?
Correct. And we have factored that into all of our budgets.
So this is just the current.
This is current membership.
And the current players.
Yep. So Grimes is done at the end of June, and Pleasant Hill is done at the end of next June. And so then essentially, any difference there, certainly there's a cost savings, but they're still contributing more than it costs. So that gets, and that's why other cities or bigger communities withdrawing has an adverse effect on Des Moines.
brings up the
That
cost.
was already
So
reflected in the numbers that you showed us.
the two that have dropped, yes.
Yeah, okay, so that's taking out
Somebody had a
like
question
$1
on the
million,
phone.
I know Chris is,
more than $1 million in budget between those two, I think, right?
More than $1 million. Sorry, I wasn't following.
Right. That's $1 million less.
Oh, between the status quo and the smaller.
no,
amount.
between the Bondurant, or I mean, between.
Oh,
Grimes and
yes,
Grimes.
between Grimes and Pleasant Hill. Thank you. My
$1
net,
million.
so full of numbers. Yes, it is over $1 million, and the FY27 budget does not include them. So we've already taken care of that.
That was in today's budget.
Yeah, one of the other things to just know with the FY27 budget is that we have been using one-time funds, first COVID funds and then capital funds, to help keep property taxes lower. At some point, and we've diminished that amount, but FY27 is the year where we're trying to get off of that altogether. And so that's why there's a 7.4 jump in FY27 and why some of the suburbs don't see a decrease in some of those years too.
So I think, was Chris on the phone? Do you have a questions, Chris?
Or it might have been Mike.
Or Mike? Somebody?
Thank you. I know you want to move on. I just would like to articulate that I do think the weighted vote definition is one way, one item on the list of things that we should deal with as we look at governance and funding?
Okay.
Thank you.
If I could add, some of the council have already heard me talk about this, but part of, if you go back one slide on the funding, you talk about off the top, but I think it's worth making sure the council understands that the way that actually looks is and correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, you look at all the expenses that you have in your budget, you take the revenues like the federal funds and fare box and things like that, and you reduce the net amount that's needed till you get to the last decision, how much property taxes do you need from the members?
What's the total local amount we need to collect in revenue? Again, it is typical in a transit system that 60 to 80% of operating revenue is local, whereas about 80% of capital is federal. So that 68%, so we'll say 29.8 million in local funds are needed. Now we run it through the formula, and right now we're running it through two formulas, and are a mix of those.
Yeah, and so, and you and I have talked about this, but again, this is our chance to get this really out into the public. Part of the funding formula discussion needs to start there so that all the members, including the suburbs, understand that there are significant revenues coming in that help everybody, help the whole system. Primarily the federal funds, right? And so what credit is being given for having those federal funds needs to be part of that conversation, because it's because of Des Moines' population that those federal funds are so large.
Yeah.
And right now, that's not part of the equation. I think for my council, the numbers may not change a lot on what we end up contributing, but the rhetoric needs to change, because it feels like there's a charity aspect that we hear. And that may not be the case when we run all of the numbers of Des Moines actually responsible for a high majority of the revenues coming in. And it's not.
Because of the ridership.
And I am going to ask Erin in a minute if there's anything she'd correct me on, because she spends more time on the numbers than me, and has been doing so for years before I came back. But again, another component, and this is where it's kind of messy, is that it isn't.
It's all messy to me.
That's true. It's all messy. If it's not complicated, it's not dart, is the saying, right? So it is all messy. But it also isn't like those federal funds can just be divvied up between everybody, right? And that is one, because I've heard Ankeny say, well, you get this much in federal funds. It's not like if they start their own transit system, and I'm just using that as an example, if they started their own transit system and didn't want to use federal funds, where will those federal funds go? Some of that is the FTA formula is based on urbanized population. So in some ways, so there is some messiness there, that there's really three different sets of borders that define us. Is the urbanized area defines for an FTA what we're getting, and ridership and population impact that, and we're in an urbanized area. Then there's the state boundaries around the transit districts, and we primarily cover Polk County, and HRDA covers the counties around us. And then there's the local/state decision around creating a regional transit authority, which supersedes, in terms of the ability to collect that state district. But it does mean that we've got three different sets of regulation and funding that get messy.
So to Scott's point, what is the federal funding that you guys are getting from the population of Des Moines, since that's not.
Would be the population.
Just off the population of Des Moines. I don't have that off the top of my head. That's what I know Scott has talked about asking us to look into. There's some other things he's asked us to look into. And again, I'll turn to Erin. Is there anything you'd want to add at this point?
The only thing I would add is that the federal.
If you want to.
Oh, sorry.
She won't be on the mic.
The formula that determines federal funding, also a large component of that is based off of service miles. And so the amount of service we provide is actually a bigger driver than the overall population. The urbanized area population is a factor. And that's why in those budget scenarios, if we have a smaller network, we have accounted for bringing in less federal funding because it's really the service hours on the road that are the biggest driver of the federal funding. But I think we have looked at how to break that down, and we can follow up with some of those numbers.
Yeah, that would be good.
That'd be helpful.
And does that federal funding take into account the DART, or does it take into account DMPS and the fairgrounds?
It does, and that's where it's helpful to the region as well, is because the ridership, but again, like Aaron said, miles more than ridership, miles more than population. Is it ridership and population? I'm getting myself mixed up. Yeah.
But it is really miles. So the miles that you do for the fair rides, for the school rides, for all
Yes.
those, help the total number.
Yes.
So
we,
it's not,
yeah.
I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking a lot of those people that come to the Capitol are from the suburbs. And so when you hear them say, well, they're paying more than their fair share, that's really bothersome, because it's those people that are coming in and parking at the Capitol or at Southeast Polk High School.
Yeah, and I will say one thing, just to know that we have worked on and are continuing, we started when I came on last year, is really doing a deep dive into the state fair costs and revenues, and making sure we look at that. There are ways how we run the service is federally regulated, so there's some things we can and can't do around fares. Like some people have said, raise the state fare rate to $5 right now. We will look at that with our fare study, which is a next component of what we're going to be doing. But I think it's important to know that we are trying to ensure, and the state fair has greatly increased how much they're paying to try and ensure that even as a service is a break-even service and not a service that is on the backs of taxpayers. Again, it's a work in progress, because obviously we can't get it all shifted overnight, but we are trying to make sure that that state fair service is fully funded. I just wanted to go back to timeline. Again, choices in front of us, and there's a lot of layers to this DART onion, and we are at April. Public input on the two concepts, and again, we're having the conversation about budget and concepts publicly. In May, the commission will make that decision on level of service to fund, and then that priority balance between coverage and ridership that we'll be talking about. We will immediately take that and begin that week after that vote, when our consultants are here starting to develop the draft plan, and that will get into all the details. So there's going to be things to say, well, I don't like that road, or I don't like this component. Today, we're not as worried about those details. Still tell them, because we'll take them into consideration. We're more worried about trying to show you the different concepts and give us feedback on that. In August, we will be coming out with that draft network, hopefully one. If there is a need because of unknowns to do a second, we can, but we do need to know that by that May 19th vote, because like I said, we're starting work that week. We'll get public input on that draft. Again, we talked about starting property tax formula and other conversations around that same time throughout the fall. And then in December, the commission makes a final decision on the network and/or anything else by that point, so that we can begin implementation work for a summer 26 rollout.
And when do we have to have a decision on the franchise fee?
That is really, really up to you. So I guess I'll turn to Scott if there's anything you want to add on that.
And
So we have a 2 million, oh, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, I'd like to see the suburbs have a franchise fee.
Yes.
That's not the legislation that was passed.
So you're hitting on both
Yes, I
questions,
understand that.
which is great questions. That's similar. So we have a $2 million commitment
For FY26.
for fiscal year '26. So starting July 1st through that next June 30th, we need to come up with the 2 million. And so that we need to have bare minimum 4 months of collections for the franchise fee to collect that $2 million in the next fiscal year. My advice would be, don't do that, but rather get it in place quickly, because
Get
that
what in
gives,
place? The
get
franchise?
get the franchise fee in place.
With a stop date, though?
Yeah, if council desires a sunset so that you have to come back and keep it going as a council, I think that would make a lot of sense. But the key here is that, the sooner the council decides, yes, we need the franchise fee to assist transit, there is an opportunity to have some reserves built up. And that will allow you to then utilize essentially more of the annual revenue that's coming in future years, knowing you've got a reserve built up in case something dips down on you.
And if we did a franchise fee, could the suburbs then lower their tax rate?
That is the plan
They're
for
already,
some.
that's the plan already.
The franchise
in
fee
place.
doesn't impact that.
No, they're going down
It
anyway.
doesn't,
So I think, at least my take, if we did the franchise fee in time to start in FY '26, what changes on this chart is that reserve line, there would be an additional 4.6 million, or 4 million, roughly 4 million, in that reserve line across the board, right? Because right now,
we put
this
down-
doesn't have any FY '26 franchise fee. We wouldn't use the full 2.5. It would allow us to build the reserve that would give us a cushion for flexibility for these other years,
If we do it.
if
now.
we did it now.
but what's hard to swallow is to say Des Moines residents, you're already paying higher taxes than any suburb, and now you're going to get a 2.5% fee, which is really a tax. Well, if you live in the suburbs, you're going to get a reduction in your taxes
And no franchise fee.
and no franchise fee.
I understand. We did ask the legislature to give the franchise fee to all the communities. That got shot down by some suburban legislators.
And
So
we
again,
are-
that is where there's a continued asks. And I'm happy to answer more questions. I just want
Why
to make
don't
sure we have a
find out
lot of
about the
slides.
System,
Yeah.
because I think the franchise fee is something that we need to talk about sooner than later. But let's find out, today was, a lot of it's about what is being proposed and the system of us being where we're at and other
I just think
communities
those
going down.
Those are just real conversations that need to be had publicly, and I don't want it to come up where the vote is taken and that we've not had those clear communication to our residents that this means an increase for you.
And there's also a choice, and I'll go back to it, it comes back to where we were before. If Des Moines doesn't want to, we can always cut service, right? That's the other option. None of us really want that, so I don't want to go down that
We may
road.
have to do that, though.
But yes, and again, that's where I've said to the mayor and Scott, let us know what you think you can contribute, and we'll design a system that fits within
And we
that.
will have that conversation when we talk about, do we do a franchise fee or not? And we will have more conversation where that will come up and more of the financials. We'll have a discussion and people can choose what they support.
But you need that answer before your May 19th
Right. We should have.
board
Well,
commission?
so what we need to know is when we're developing the draft plan, are we all able and agreed to fund that draft plan? Or do we need to bring out a smaller plan because we're not confident that the funding is there? Because we have to, on any plan, get public input. I know we all love, but it is necessary and it is important. And so we have to get that input. So we don't want to bring out a draft plan that we can't afford, and then it'll delay the whole thing if we do. So we do need to know by mid-May, again, what that amount is that the city of Des Moines is willing to pay.
Far from now. I just am very uncomfortable with the way we just approved our budget, where it seems to me where we didn't get a lot of input as to what was happening. And I'm bothered by that. I don't think it's fair to the taxpayers.
So I have to correct the record here, Mayor, if I
Okay.
can.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Councilwoman. But we had more input than we've had in 10 or 12 years within the budget process. I
We had a lot
understand
of
people.
changes.
But we gave
Yeah,
people a
but-
chance to have input, and we added 2 more meetings to get more input. We had, I understand this is the first time in 12 years we've had a budget decrease, but we had more conversations on the budget than we have had in the years I've been on.
Well, it's definitely been more than the last 12 years, but this has been a different budget where we had to make cuts. And we did have 2 additional meetings, what Scott's talking about, when we decided these are the cuts that we're going to make. Let's get the input from our citizens and let them see what our budget is looking like at that point. I believe there was 2 positions that were eliminated before that, which was the sustainability, and that was done Because there is no more federal grants. Our government is changed federally different with,
Yeah.
and that's why we made those decisions then with those positions. But I think, to Scott's point, you and I have been doing this for a lot longer than everyone else. We did have more public meetings, more input. So I guess I'm
We did.
confused that we're not, I mean.
And some people don't, let's stick to what we're here today for.
Yeah.
We will have a conversation, more because the franchise fee, we have mentioned, we've had that option, that we would probably be bringing it forward. And we will have that discussion at the council table on if you support it, or if you don't, and what the implications will be for DART if we do not do it. And I think that's where we need to get centered on. And that's why we need to hear, what are the proposals?
Yep.
How is the system going to work? And how is it going to either benefit or not benefit the Des Moines residents?
Yep.
And so just so we're all aware, is this an hour and a half
Scheduled till
work
9.
session?
Yes, it's scheduled till
You-
9.
Because, until 9, okay, all right.
And that's,
Are we
yeah,
doing
and sorry, we didn't plan to take that much time on those first few slides. So I'm going
we
to ask
doing
Ricky,
okay
go
on
really
time?
quickly through the
That's why I wanna
background.
get through for a
Go
while.
through the background and then to the city of Des Moines. We'll spend most of the time on what it means for Des Moines. So really pleased, Ricky with Jarrett Walker and Associates. We as staff have been talking over the last few weeks. We're very grateful. The mayor participated in our RFP process, but JWA is doing a fabulous job and has done this across the country and the world, and appreciate you being here. So I'll hand it to Ricky.
How many of these have you done?
I've done quite a few. No, thank you for having me here today. I know that some of you have already heard me present, but I still think it's important to be here and talk specifically about Des Moines and to have a clear conversation about what transit can be in your region. In case you haven't seen me, I think I've seen all of you, I think I met you, but my name is Ricky Ngata and I work for a company called Jarrett Walker and Associates. We do projects very similar to this throughout the country and throughout the world, where we help look at different transit systems and advise changes, very often full transit network redesigns, just like this one. We've worked in many different cities, but the most important thing is our mission statement. We foster clear conversations about transit that lead to confident decisions. I'm not here as the consultant that's coming out of town to tell you what you should do. I'm not here to tell you to do what we did in Miami because it worked in Miami. I'm here to give you the options of what the transit network can be so that we can have a clear conversation about goals and we can together determine what is the best transit network for the Des Moines region. So let's talk about goals for transit. I have been hearing you all talk a lot about ridership and the ridership in Des Moines. And so I want to talk about different goals associated with transit because ridership is just one goal. And depending on what you want transit to do in your community, maybe transit isn't what you want. And I never go to any community telling them that they should want high ridership because that is one goal. So let's talk about the ridership coverage trade-off. Imagine this fictional town. In this town, the lines are streets and the dots are people and jobs. Most of the activity is concentrated in just 2 corridors, as it happens in many cities and many neighborhoods. A lot of the activities there, so you can imagine about 70% of the activities there. We have 18 buses, and you hire me to design a transit network. First thing I would do is ask what the goal is. If you tell me that the goal is ridership and ridership alone, then I would design a network that is focused on the places where most people live to try to make the network as useful as I can to the most people and have it be as frequent as possible. So I would design a network that looks like this. All of the service is concentrated on just 2 corridors where most of the activity is. Because all 18 buses are on those 2 corridors, that means that the buses come very frequently. So in this network, those 2 routes come every 10 minutes. The people that live along there find the service very useful. And because they find the service very useful, they're more likely to ride transit. They can get it to get anywhere along that route, but they can also transfer to the other route very easily because that is also coming very frequently. So they don't wait a lot at the beginning, they don't wait a lot to transfer. And so this network is very useful to a lot of people. And if the service is more useful, more people will ride. So you get higher ridership. That's why we call this the ridership concept. You would not just get high ridership, but high ridership relative to cost, which is what we call productivity in the transit world. This network does a lot, but it doesn't go everywhere. Down in the southeast lives Mrs. Jones, and Mrs. Jones doesn't like this network because it doesn't go near her house. If you want to provide service to Mrs. Jones in the southeast, Mr. Smith in the northeast, and to everybody in every little corner of this town, then maybe what you want is not ridership. Maybe your goal should be coverage. And if your goal is coverage, I would design a network like this. We spread the service out so that as many people as possible have a little bit of service. Instead of 2 routes, you now have 10. But in spreading the service out, you spread it thinly, which means that the routes in this network are coming every 60 minutes. We all have 24 hours in a day, so not everybody either has the patience or has the time to wait for a 60-minute route. So you wouldn't expect a lot of people to ride transit here. You would get some people, and those people would be very appreciative. And they're going to tell the city council, they're going to tell DART that they really appreciate that service. But it's not going to be a lot of people, because a lot of people have limited time. Even especially low-income people that have 2 jobs and they don't have a lot of time in their day to be traveling. So in this network, you wouldn't get a lot of people to ride transit. But that is okay, because the goal of this network is not high ridership. The goal of this network is to provide high coverage. And that's what it's doing. And you would measure the success of this by just measuring the percentage of the people that are close to transit service, regardless of frequency, regardless of how useful it is. Both of these goals are really important, but they lead in opposite directions, so it's important to talk about each one. If you're going for something that's more like a ridership goal, then a slogan for that would be thinking like a business. Because you're trying to get more ridership, that's a lower subsidy per passenger. It would support suburban dense development, or it would support dense walkable development, sorry. And it aligns with all the sustainability goals, because you get a lot of people to ride transit, so you get all of those environmental benefits of reducing vehicle mile travels and other things. If you're going for a coverage goal, a slogan would be access for all. You're providing some sort of lifeline access to as many people as possible, regardless of where they live. It supports suburban low-density development, and it provides as much service to not just every city, but as many neighborhoods as you can within a specific place. That's coverage. So these are the 2 goals, and it's really hard to choose between the 2. The good news is that it's not just one or the other. This is a spectrum, and you can choose a point between them. But they do pull in opposite direction, which means that you can't use the same dollar to do both. The more you do of one, the less you do of the other. Because it's so hard to choose between these 2, what we have done in this phase of this project is to design 2 conceptual alternatives of what the network could be for the DART region. 3 things before I dive into these networks. First, the budget that we're using. We've had a lot of conversation about budget just now, and I want to say that regardless of what budget level you end up with, the decision and the conversation between ridership and coverage still exist. So it's still important to have this conversation, because even if you end up with a smaller budget, there's still a decision about what the goal and what the purpose of transit is, and then we would be able to design a network around that. So it's important to still have this exercise. Second is that member communities within both of these concepts have a similar amount of service, so you can look at the ridership coverage trade-off regionally, but also within each city. And the third thing is to remind you all that they are concepts. These are not proposals, they are not recommendations. So focus on the big picture and focus on the goals and what each of these is trying to achieve. Any questions there before I dive into the actual concepts?
Any questions? Okay, keep moving.
All right, sounds good. First, let me show you your existing network. On all of our maps, the colors are very important. Routes that are red come every 15 minutes or better. Routes that are purple come every 20. Routes that are dark blue come every 30, and light blue every 60. In your current network, you have one segment that is red that is coming out of downtown and along University. That's the combination of the 3 and the 60 that combines for every 10 minutes. Apart from that, you have 20-minute services going north, west, and south, and some 30-minute services going east. There are 60-minute services filling in the gaps between those routes, and there's a lot of those brown routes that you see only run during the peak times. And you have a lot of that just because of travel patterns in the past. But there's a lot of peak-only services in your network. Let's look at the ridership concept. Looks like this. First thing you see is that the colors change. There are less routes total, but they are more dark blue and red. The red routes come every 15 minutes, and there are 5 red routes in the ridership concept. Remember, we're trying to concentrate service into the busiest places, so less routes total, but the routes come more frequently. There are frequent services here going west along University all the way out to Valley West Mall, west on Ingersoll, northwest along MLK to Polk County River Place, to the east along University, and to the south along Southwest 9th. You also have a lot of 30-minute services, and within Des Moines, you mostly have 30-minute services apart from that along your next strongest corridors. Something that we've done in both concepts that I think is worth pointing out is that Route 4 that you see is a route that hits a lot of outer destinations in sort of a big loop that goes out of downtown, up 14th, and across west on Euclid to Merle Hay Mall. And then it does a big loop around Urbandale, Clive, and West Des Moines, coming back in on Ingersoll. So that connects a lot of points that are not just downtown, and it moves a little away from having everybody come to downtown. So that's a change over today that we're doing in both concepts. Big picture, less routes, more frequent. Let's look at coverage concept. You see that there are more routes, but most of the routes are blue. There are still 2 red segments along 2 very strong corridors that you have on University and Ingersoll. Everything else is blue. You have a lot of dark blue in your next strongest corridors, and a lot of light blue filling in the gaps. And so where in the ridership concept, there were some gaps, like you didn't see service on Hickman, but you did see something on Franklin and MLK. Well, here you also have that service on Hickman like you do today. It's filling in those gaps and is providing service to as many places as possible, but at a lower frequency. That's that trade-off. Something else to point out here is those brown zones around the edges. Those brown zones are microtransit services. They are similar to Ankeny on Demand, but they're a little different, and I want to mention what they're like. There are none of those within Des Moines, but I also want to explain why that is. This is the spectrum of what transit services can be. Imagine this neighborhood that has one major street that goes through it. On the left, that bold line is a fixed route. So one way that you could design transit service here is to have a fixed route that just goes along that bold line. It does that on every trip. There will be fixed stops in there where people can walk out to, and they would expect a bus to be there when it's scheduled. On the right is fully flexible service that goes from anywhere to anywhere. Now, that is similar to the on-demand Ankeny that you do today, where someone can get a call. They would call to schedule a ride. They would get picked up at their house, dropped off anywhere they want to go within the zone. That is a coverage tool. And the reason why it is a coverage tool and we only have it in the coverage concept is mostly because of capacity. In your system today, the fixed routes that you have get something between 10 to 35 boardings per hour. On-demand services get about 4 riders per hour, or at the very, very most, maybe 5 boardings per hour. And the reason for that is because of what the driver's physically doing. If you imagine what a driver is doing here, they're going to pick someone up at their house, wait for them to put their coat on, get in the car, drive to their destination, drop them off, drive to the next person, drive to their destination, drop them off. It's very similar to a taxi service. And if you think about what a taxi person can do, they can only really move 4, maybe 5 trips in 1 hour. So they're just physically limited by what a driver can do within that time. Microtransit service can provide a little bit of service to a lot of people, but it has a limited capacity of what it can do. So it will never get high ridership relative to cost. It physically can't.
But will it cover, like, if you go back one slide, will it cover the ridership in those areas with the limited amount that you can pick up? Like, I mean, are we picking up more than 4 people per hour, or how, do we know that?
We do know that, and we have data on where you have pickups and drop-offs, and we have data on what you have throughout routes. And so what you see in your fixed route networks, network-wide, is that on every route, you get something between 10 and 35 riders per hour. So that already is more than what it can do,
Right.
Which means that if you want to replace your lowest productive fixed route, you need to pay double the amount to provide microtransit. So it's going to be more expensive.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
Can you do microtransit without going door to door?
Yes,
Can
and
you
so
Okay.
you can, and that's what I want to show here.
sorry.
Because no, that's fine. Good segue. So there's a spectrum of things that you can do between these two. And I want to point to this one because that's what we have in the coverage concept. And in here, the driver is staying just along the main streets. They might call for a ride, they might have to wait up to an hour, and they'll be asked to go walk down to the main street in their neighborhoods to get picked up. But what that does is that it makes it a little more efficient for the drivers so they don't have to go down every little street to pick everybody up. and it still provides service within a quarter mile of everyone, which is really the goal of these services, to provide some service close to as many people as possible. If you were to do something like this, it would be a little more efficient, but it still wouldn't get you probably more than 5 an hour. It's much better than the door-to-door, which door-to-door is just very restrictive. I think in Ankeny On Demand, you get something like 3.5 boardings now. So here you might get something like 5, pushing it at the very edge.
In Ankeny, you get how many?
It's like 3.5, 3.7 boardings an hour.
And are they having complaints that their service is lacking there, or are they
they're over.
being like complimented, like this is the best service that we've ever had?
I think the service does what it's supposed to. I mean, it provides a little bit of service to some people. And so it's not getting high ridership. It's not getting very useful service to a lot of people. But the people are using really
But
appreciate
it is
it.
providing them the service that
Yeah, I
their
think-
residents requested.
One component to note with that, you might have seen there was a register story, is that their residents are asking them to add more service. We are maxed out on what we can afford to provide. So there are currently, and that's where we run out of, there's trip denials. And I can't remember what our current, but we can have up to like 30, 40%, I believe, trip denials, because we don't have more room
Okay.
and we don't have more time. So that's the downside. So yes, the residents really like it. They want more of it. We don't have the money to fund more.
Yeah, that was my question.
But I think that's where another
Appreciate it.
conversation is, what can you charge for that specialized service? Because right now, you're limited. So they're
Right.
getting a pretty door-to-door service at a rate that you would have public transit.
Yep.
We'll look at that with the fair study.
No, not at a loss. It's,
Door-to-door at a loss, or,
no.
A loss to the system?
well,
A loss of money that you're paying.
Yeah.
No, I think you can, go ahead.
It's just very expensive service to provide. Because with the same amount of money that you put in, you don't get as many riders as you can in fixed route. So it's a higher cost per rider than what fixed route is. Yeah, and there's a high limitation, like we were saying. So it's just more expensive to move more people that way,
it's kind of like a concierge service.
basically.
What's a taxi service?
Yeah.
And Scott, what happened to our study? Didn't we hire a consultant to look at the Ankeny? Whatever happened to that? Have we ever had any conversations about that?
on Des Moines.
I know, but do we have the results of that?
We had a presentation on it.
Do we,
I looked at some of those results, and it
They've
basically.
got, they have
Yeah.
that report
I-
too.
I look at this as well, and it essentially says something similar. It's like it's really hard to provide service in a lot of your places and replace your routes because they're getting more than what it would be. So if you were to replace it with microtransit, it would be much more than double the cost. It's just physically and mathematically how it works. Okay. And it's been really attractive on the news and different transit agencies, and a lot of it is the marketing around it. It's not a new idea, but now you have the apps. And so there's a lot of companies that are pushing it just in general to try to get more people to do that, but then it's more expensive. People really appreciate it, but it's more expensive.
But if people are willing to pay for it,
Yeah,
I mean, if people, I mean, that's where you go into what are the fares for this type of service?
what is the fare for that type of service? Like in Ankeny, what are they, if I pick somebody up at the door and I bring them downtown, what do you?
Yeah, so we are going to look at the fares with the fare study. So just so you know, I'm not
There's
saying the
two
fares are,
separate-
but it's $3.50, which is twice what a fixed route is. And one of the things, so then it's $7 round trip. And what we need to consider with all of this is no public transit makes money or breaks even. That's why it's publicly subsidized, right? Should we pay more? And then we know we also have a lot of people who can't afford the fares we currently
So
have.
do you have a tier?
So there's some fine balance here. I think it's 96% of our riders make less, or I know more than 90% make 50,000 or less. So the majority of our riders are low income. So $7 to you and me isn't a lot, but to
Well,
others it might
it
be.
might not be a lot in the suburbs too, to some individuals also. Maybe in the city of Des Moines, $7 is a lot, but I'm thinking that where you're doing this type of service, they might have $7 instead of spending $50 on an Uber to get them downtown.
Ricky, would you share what you've seen in other cities in terms of what they're charging for on-demand?
Yeah, they've been charging something that is, I think, pretty similar to this. It's something that is like double what you might be charging. So something like this. If you want to charge a lot more, then that's also going to get a lot of people away from it. So you would get very few people use it, and it would be less useful to a lot of people. Yeah.
But just to clarify, the Ankeny on demand, it's routes within Ankeny. They don't.
Yeah,
take
it's
you
only
downtown.
within Ankeny.
So they don't take you downtown. It's like,
Right.
okay, I want to go
It's only Ankeny.
to Costco. Yeah, or
Anywhere,
a doctor's
anywhere within
office.
that zone in Ankeny, and it can also take you and connect to a fixed route there, but then when you connect to that fixed route, you have to transfer and then come back in. Or you have the
So then you
98.
have to pay to go downtown if you want to do that, but, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Context, I mean, we know, for example, what like the average paratransit route or trip is like $35 per trip, right?
And
Is that-
it's gone up since that.
Okay.
So a lot of
Right.
factors, but yes, I would say 35 to 50 would be the average, but it also depends how far you're going, and we're having more people travel further on paratransit across our community.
Because of the way the medical facilities are spread out. And
So, let me show you something that is sort of happening in the background in these maps, and you can't just see it from looking at the maps. Service on the weekends. This is your network today. This map is just the existing network that I showed before, just a mini map to show the colors at high scale. The service on Sunday today looks like this. Most of your routes are run every 20 minutes, or the 10 minutes, or 30 minutes. They go down to every 60 minutes on Sundays. That's the way your network works today. The frequency that we see on the maps is during the middle of the day on a weekday, but you have much less service on Sundays. And the ridership concept, that is the map of that I showed you before, just a smaller version of it. And that's what it looks like in Sundays. We are keeping all of that service, all of that frequency still running on the Sundays. Now, part of the reason why we're doing that is because travel patterns have changed. 10 years ago, there was a really big focus on 9 to 5 work. A lot of people were going to the office 9 to 5. I used to do that. I used to go to the office at 8 in the morning, come back at 5. But that's happening less now. And people are traveling throughout the day at different times of the day. And even people that are still traveling 9 to 5, they would value service in the middle of the day and in the evenings in case something comes up, right? If a person gets a call from their kid's school and knows that they need to come back, they might need to come back home in the middle of the day. And so having service throughout the day makes it more useful for them as well. If they have to work late, then having service in the evening can be good for them to be able to get back home after working late. And many service and retail workers work not just 9 to 5 or not just weekends, but they work in the weekends as well. So having all day, all week service is a place where we see a huge growth in ridership throughout the country. That's a ridership concept, coverage concept, lower frequencies, but we're still keeping all those routes. All the routes that are colored and come frequently do that for 12 hours of the day on weekdays and 10 hours of the day on Saturdays and Sundays. So a big improvement over today on both networks. Wanted to just mention that since it's in the background in these maps.
So question, so I think now Sunday is the biggest shopping day for most Americans. So, but also I noticed that the routes that go to two of the malls are more frequent, and yet our malls are struggling. Is that a fair?
Only one of them's really good right now.
So are we weighted toward routes to the malls when they're facing a lot of challenges, and it's not so much shopping like it used to be? I don't
Well, also remember that a lot of people that might be using these systems might not be people shopping, it might be the actual employees themselves.
Right.
So when you think about mall, it's definitely the people going there, but places that have a lot of jobs have a lot of destination for a lot of people. So hospitals, schools, malls, restaurants, all kinds of things. It's people that need to be
But
there.
if there's shops that are closing at the malls,
Yeah, but
I
you
don't know.
still, right now,
It's-
I think right now you still have enough other stuff around
Right.
it. And when you look at certain malls that have decreased, there's some stores that are definitely
Yeah.
still in existence. Maybe you don't have to the degree, but
Yeah, and it's not just that one destination at the mall, is everything along the route.
Route,
So everything
yes.
along the way makes the transit service very useful. It's important that transit,
Okay,
yeah.
thanks, appreciate the clarification.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
So let's see something else about how these two networks compare. Some of you might have seen these bubbles that I've been showing that show where a person can get to in 45 minutes. Here, there is a person, her name is Jane, and she is in Polk County River Place, and she's asking where she can go in 45 minutes. We can draw a bubble that shows where she can get to within the existing network. This bubble takes into account walking to a bus stop, waiting for the bus, and riding the bus itself. So within 45 minutes, she can go anywhere within this bubble. If we look at the ridership concept, the bubble looks like that. We can put them on top of each other, and we can count the number of jobs in here and measure Jane's access to jobs. And we see that in the ridership concept, from Polk County River Place, Jane can reach 12,000 more jobs than in the existing network. And if we think of Polk County River Place like a destination, 22,000 more people can reach Polk County River Place in those 45 minutes. Now, some of it is because of network changes that we did with Route 4 that I was saying, but a lot of it is because of the change in frequency. Today, you're providing 20-minute service to Polk County River Place. In the ridership concept, we have 15-minute service, which means that people wait less so they can travel more and reach more destinations. That's why frequency is so important. The coverage concept, bubble looks like that. We put it on top, and we can measure, and we see that there's still some improvement over what it is today because of the network changes, but there's some loss. You can reach 3,000 more jobs in today, or 5,000 more residents. There's some loss going into downtown because here we have a 30-minute route, so people have to wait longer than today, and they can travel less. So they can't get quite as far into downtown. If they transfer, you see that gray area, they can't travel quite as much along University after they transfer. So higher frequency means that people wait more and they can travel less and reach less destinations, so it's less useful to them. That's a trade-off between ridership and coverage. Another example from the airport. The bubble today looks like this in the middle of the day, which is mostly just walking since the service that you provide is mostly during the peaks. That's the bubble in the ridership concept where you had 30-minute service. If we overlay it on top, 12,000 more jobs or 18,000 more residents. If we look at the coverage concept, the bubble looks like this. We have 60-minute service here, and compare that today, and you got 2,000 more jobs and 3,000 more residents. Lower frequency, which means people wait more and they can't travel as far. Still better than not providing anything in the middle of the day, but can't reach as many jobs as ridership. And I have another example here from Easter Lake Drive in Indianola. This is a place that is lower density, and we are not including in the ridership concept. So I wanted to show you what this is like. That's the bubble today. That's the bubble in ridership. It's the same, and there is no change because there isn't any service there in the ridership concept. In the coverage concept, we're providing some service here. It's limited 60-minute service. The bubble looks like this. So it grows a little more, and if we count up the number of people and jobs, 1,000 more jobs and 5,000 more residents. So it's an increase over nothing. It's still not a big increase. And that's that trade-off between ridership and coverage. In coverage, you're reaching many, many places, but you're providing them with something it's a little better. And that's how it is. They can reach a few more jobs.
But in an area like on the southeast, if we said, we know we have an issue over here, and that's where we could layer in a limited microtransit or whatever.
There could potentially be other pieces of the puzzle and other things that we can do in there.
Curious. Yeah, but it would cost more.
That would be additional, right?
Right.
So in here, we're thinking about the entire network, the core of the network, and what we want it to be. Really quickly, so these are 3 locations. We did the same analysis everywhere. And in here, we can see specifically from different places what it's like for different people. Green is an increase in access. Brown is a decrease in access. And the darker the color, the greater the change. And here, we're comparing ridership to existing. But more important than just the specific places, we can average it out throughout the region. And we see that in the region, the average resident, the ridership concept, can reach 23% more jobs. There are gains and there are losses, but the average resident can reach 23% more jobs. In the coverage concept, there is more brown. Because of the decrease in frequency, there's a lot more brown in Des Moines. If we average it out, the average resident can reach 9% less jobs. There are some gains, there are some losses, but because of the decrease in frequencies, 9% less jobs on average. That is all residents, but this is specifically for Des Moines. That first row shows what it's like for the average resident. In the ridership concept, there is an increase of 19% more jobs. In the coverage concept, there is a decrease of 15% less jobs. That's a trade-off between ridership and coverage. We also looked at low-income residents, houses with their cars, residents of color. It's a very similar trend for all of these, but I just wanted to show that we looked at that as well. And really quickly to show Sundays, since there is such a big change on
Would
Sundays.
you go back one slide?
Yes.
One more.
One more?
No, I'm sorry, go forward one.
Sure.
Average resident, okay. I'm just, when we talk about access to jobs, I have got on DART, and I've just ridden it. And I've not seen, I don't know that any of the riders that I've seen were actually going to jobs.
Oh, great point.
They
Great-
were going to the grocery store, or they were going, at one time, they got on there because they wanted the free internet. So they would just ride the bus for the free internet. And I've tried to be really aware. I don't think I saw anybody that was actually going to a job.
Okay. Well, something I usually have on my slides at the beginning, but I took out because of time, is that we use jobs in this analysis because that's the data that's available, but access to different opportunities and different things can include schools, parks, medical services, people that you can meet, all kinds of things. Jobs is a really good proxy for representing those things because places that have a lot of jobs also have a lot of other activities. Malls that have a lot of jobs have a lot of shopping. Hospitals that have a lot of jobs have a lot of people going. Schools have a lot of jobs, have a lot of students. And so jobs just tends to be a really good proxy for all kinds of opportunities and all kinds of things that people can do.
Okay.
Okay. Sundays, because we're keeping the frequency, there is a big improvement in both. So for the average resident in the coverage concept, 106% more jobs for the average resident in ridership concept, 189%, so a huge increase. Black's measure, how many people are close to transit? Just measuring the sheer amount of people that are close to transit without, for different frequencies. Let me show you what it's like for specifically Des Moines. Today, you have 9% of residents that are close to 15-minute service, but 62% of the residents are close to any type of service. If we look at the ridership concept, because we have more red routes, you have 29% residents that are close to 15-minute service, a huge increase over that 9% today. But close to any service, it decreases by 3%. So a little bit less people are close to any service, but a lot more people close to frequent service. In the coverage concept, there's a little increase in the 15-minute service because of the Ingersoll. But there's an increase in the total residents that are close to any service of 6%. So it depends on what your goal is. Do you focus more on anybody having a little bit of service, that's coverage, or more people having useful 15-minute service, that's ridership?
Why did the red go up in this one?
Because we have additional service on Ingersoll, that's every 15 minutes.
Right, you have more
Yeah.
15-minute service.
And we did that because it's a strong corridors, but also so that the route can then split into other areas. And it just geographically worked really nice to have that every 15 minutes in coverage. Also, jobs in general throughout the region. In the existing network, you have 29% of jobs close to frequent service, 71 close to any. In ridership, that increases by 11%, so you have half the jobs in your city would be near 15-minute service.
21%.
That's right, not 11, 21%.
11's
Typo.
Next one.
And only 2% less close to any service. In the coverage concept, the number close to any service, which is the goal, increases by 4%. That's how these change. Just to show quickly, we looked at low-income residents, and it's a very similar trend to what it is, a huge increase in people close to 15-minute service in ridership, and a small increase in any service in the coverage concept. And on Sundays, just to show you because of the big difference, nobody near frequent service today, up to 29% in the ridership concept because it's the same as what we have during weekdays, and then 58%, so a 2% to a 3% decrease. And in the coverage concept, a slight increase of 7%. That's how these networks compare. It's really hard to choose between these two because neither one of them is objectively correct. Neither one of them is the technically right answer. Both of these networks are good. They both align with good goals. They lead in opposite directions, and it really just depends on what the goals of the community is and what you want transit to achieve for the city of Des Moines and the Des Moines region. And so What's next is that we're asking the public throughout the month of April what they think between these concepts. So encourage you all to spread the word, tell as many people as you can. What we are asking the public, and we ultimately want to hear from you all as well, is where do you land between these five? Strongly towards ridership or coverage? Do you lean towards ridership or coverage? Or halfway in between? And then we're going to give, the survey ends on April 30th. We're going to have the results early in May. We have a commission meeting on May 6th where we want to hear what every member community thinks, what they're leaning. And then on May 19th, we want direction from the commission on what the draft network should be. Happy to take any questions. Yes?
Yeah, so if we lean toward the ridership model, over time, would people make their choices for where they live or where they rent apartments on our transit corridors because the bus service is better on those corridors? I mean, is that what has happened elsewhere, where the transit leans toward the ridership?
Yeah, potentially yes. So land use and transit are very intertwined. And it's really good that you go through this exercise and that it also informs what your land use planning should be, because you want to focus dense development in the places where people can use and rely on transit. And there are many places across the country that have developed the places along their frequent corridors to be able to have higher frequency in places where people can actually depend and use transit and move more efficiently. In Portland, Oregon, there is the FX2 route that they have developed a lot along the corridor. It's not train, it's a bus, and they have developed a lot so that they have higher density along that corridor. So, great question. Yes, it's ideally more people live where there is higher frequency, and that makes it more efficient for everyone.
So, question, and I appreciate this presentation, and I know we have to make a choice, but there's one thing missing, and maybe I'm missing out, or maybe they both cost the same. But what is, if I choose coverage over ridership, what's the cost? I mean, is it more money? Is it less money? Is it the same?
These are both the same. These are using the same amount of service that DART has today.
Based on the budget.
Based on the budget today. And the way that we calculate budget for transit service is the hours of the buses on the street. And so this is using the same, it's called revenue hours, the same revenue hours that you have on the street today.
Okay.
Both of these have. It's the same on both. It's just
Okay.
allocated differently.
That's, I mean, I was just missing that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like-
so it's, the question is, as a group, do we want more ridership or more coverage? Do we want the coverage model or the ridership model?
Where? Yep.
These are the questions.
Yep. That's what we want to hear.
The question for me is it sustainable? I mean, that's been our whole problem throughout these years, and for as many years as I've sat on council, have said, what are we going to do to make it so we don't have to have franchise fees, so we don't have to keep raising the rates? That's never happened, and now we're saying, okay, pick one of these, but is it sustainable? What happens, we know that if you do a sunset on a franchise fee, it's going to be gone in a few years. Then who's going to pay for this?
Yeah.
What are we doing to make it so it is sustainable?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, one, again, they're two separate choices, one being the budget. So we go back to, again, what you saw here is using the same hours of service, a status quo budget. So I'd say we're looking at a lot of things all the time to try and be sustainable. Like last year, we cut 4 administrative positions, we cut $1 million in administrative expenses. But there are some things I can't change, which is that the biggest cost is the driver of the bus and the fuel and all of those components. So as we look at a bed being very financially conservative, we still grow at 4%. And that's where the budget, the only choice is really to cut service. And that's why what the concepts you see here are status quo budget. If you wanted to go with the smaller network, that gives us longer stability. But we do have to remember as a whole, that's why we also know we are going to, at some point in the future, need something else, just like we do with property taxes and other components. You know, nothing's long-term, but we've focused on making sure we have that 5-year stability. Again, would I rather have 10 or 20? Sure. But with the tools we have from the legislature, those different size networks, this amount of service is the choice we have.
I mean, we had to take a $17 million cut. We had to look at that.
Well,
And that's where it just means cutting service, right? That's the choice. And so that's where the two decisions are separate decisions. So tell us, again, that's where I say, tell us what you want from a budget perspective, and we'll put as much service as we can. And then how do we want that service divided up between coverage and ridership?
Right, we still have to make the coverage ridership decision.
Yes.
Even if the
no
the
matter what the
legislature
service is.
caps things and we're cutting 40%, we still have to make a decision, do we design a service that emphasizes ridership or coverage?
That's right.
And, I mean, I think, I know where I stand. I mean, I think the ridership concept, and if you design a system for ridership in mind, and it's a high-functioning system, that maybe actually allows you in the future to have other conversations because you've gotten more riders, you've demonstrated the usefulness and efficiency of the service, and then it maybe even brings in more revenue or more willingness to invest.
And that is the case you found, that if you have more ridership, if you go the ridership model, usually you get more riders
Right, right.
because of the frequency and the ability to.
Exactly. The higher frequency in dense places means that the service is more useful to more people because they can reach more destinations within their limited time. And if the service is more useful, more people ride it. And we've seen that in places where we've redesigned networks leaning towards ridership.
And I don't think that you can guarantee that you have a sustainable forever. We didn't predict that we were going to have to make a $17 million cut. We were handed a bill that changed the rules. So what you want to do is try to get it as stable as long as you can get it. But to have stabilization for 5 years is probably pretty good in this environment. So
now, are you looking for us to give
and we
choose
can-
today?
No,
Are
we
you
don't have
asking
to
us
choose today. If you know where you're at, we will take those comments, but we need to know before the May meeting
Yep.
where this council is, because we're going to do it as the
I'll lean
representative.
towards the coverage concept.
Okay,
Not strongly preferred, but I would lean towards that.
Okay, and I'm B, I lean toward the
ridership.
ridership concept.
Okay.
And are you anywhere yet, or we can come back around?
I would be B.
Okay.
Okay.
But I think there's a lot of, to me, we're missing the conversation about how are we going to pay for it.
Yeah.
And that's what I don't like.
Well, the conversation will be, we already are paying a certain amount, and we have committed, and whether we do a franchise fee or not will be the bigger conversation on how we pay for it.
Let me give you a quick example of how, regardless of budget level, this is still important. If you have, for example, 4 routes that come every 60 minutes, that's coverage. If you combine those into one route that comes every 15 minutes, that's ridership. If you have half the budget, then you might have 2 routes that come every 60 minutes, that's coverage.
I get it.
Or 1 route that come every 30, and that's ridership. So the trade-off still exists, and it's separable from the budget.
Yeah, and that's part of why we're looking at the smaller network is, again, that reality of trying to get to sustainability for as long as possible. I'm not excited about having less service. We have people who need more service, but we also need to ensure sustainability. One thing I did forget to mention, and just want to make sure I'm clear, not all of the suburbs are going to get reductions with the property tax formula. So I want to be clear on that so that we're not lumping everybody together. For sure, West Des Moines, Altoona, and Windsor Heights are going up. Again, it depends on the amount of service and the population. Both Windsor Heights and West Des Moines will hit that same cap and have to have a determination of how they fund the additional components as well. So that's why we do know there's long-term needs here. We do, and I would love to, like you said, have a plan that's sustainable forever, but the only way we're going to get further with the state or federal government is if we are aligned as a region, and that's some of what we're trying to do through this process is further have those conversations on what do we need to be aligned and ask for something better or different.
Will you go back a few, like the slides where it showed that smaller service and
The budget?
yeah.
Yeah. It'll take a second.
Yeah, we have a few minutes there.
Yeah, so the maps and the access and everything you've seen here are a status quo budget. So you won't get those same increases if we do a smaller budget. Again, you still have to make the choice of what we're trying to achieve, and that's something I really heard when I interviewed for this position was that there wasn't a clear vision, and it's really hard as staff to execute on a different thing for every member community, and so trying to come to that vision of what success looks like is a key part of this, as well as, again, the sustainability and looking at that budget.
So reducing service 20 to 25%. How far out do we go? Because we have.
I haven't gone further. We can go further out. It gives you more than 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Because at FY31, you'd have 7.2 in your reserves.
Yeah.
Well,
That's
that's a discussion council's going to, I'll have a chance to
Right.
talk through that with you.
Yeah.
The key here is that in the smaller network, in 2031, there's an anticipation of 7.8 million coming in franchise fee in that year, plus a little over 10 million of property taxes, gets you almost exactly the 17.9 total commitment.
Right.
Correct?
Yep.
And
I
so
would also note one
It's a
thing.
break-even year.
Yeah.
The next year after that, it falls apart. You have to either use reserves, or if you don't have reserves, or.
But the reserves are built up by the 2.5% franchise fee that we're not giving all the dollars. Is that where you're getting the reserves from?
Correct, through the first 4 years in this scenario.
Yeah, 27.
And possibly even sooner.
Right, if we added.
So are we using in the reserve in the small, I'm looking at the smaller network, the 3.4 million. But do we don't have to use that because we have enough dollars to do the, or are we
12.8
using?
to get to 12.8.
We have to use the 3.4 to get to the 12.8?
We do not, that's
No.
the piece that.
Right. So all of those reserve dollars stay in that basic account,
Yes,
and then it does make it sustainable longer though, then, doesn't it? If we have all of those dollars?
Well, you hit,
Yes.
you hit a year, and I think the year that you hit is maybe FY 32 or 33.
Right.
And then you start
Going back.
dipping into the reserves every year.
yeah, to a big degree.
One thing
Millions.
to note as a whole is really that bottom line, that bottom line. And the difference in Des Moines' contribution as a small network is the difference between 7.9 and 20 million. So it's a $2.1 million difference, but it does have a larger increase on service, again, because it comes back to a couple of things. The more service we have, the more efficient the service is. Things interline, right? So when we reduce service, it's less efficient. We also get less federal funding. We also get less revenue. And so that's why you'll see, the difference for the revenue perspective for Des Moines is about 10% between those two, but it takes a 20% service cut to get that 10%. And that's where the trade-off is hard. And I appreciate you wrestling with hard decisions.
Services 20, 25%, you're going to lose federal funding, and
Yep.
that's
That's factored in there.
that
Yep.
is factored in.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's why it takes for 5 years, it takes a 20 to 25% service cut to get stable. And you see, again, you're still increasing over years, but it's that stability because it has that ripple effect to the other funding.
So you're saying in 32 that we're going to use up all of that 7.2 million that we had in
No,
reserve?
not all of it.
No.
but
But it would be like $1 million or $2 million that year, and then $1 million or $2 million in 33.
Every year goes.
So I mean, if we did this could be sustainable for 8 years, maybe? 8 to 10.
If all the estimates come in as expected,
Well, but
Yeah.
if we pass this,
which never happens.
if we pass this
Right, I know.
today so that it applies to FY 26, that reserve number would increase
Yeah.
about 4 million.
So it
So
would probably take it out to about 10 years then.
Yeah.
that would take it out even.
But we have 20 to 25% less service.
Right.
Yeah,
So-
and with that, if you started collecting the franchise fee earlier, and this is where we haven't run when to collect it, because that is your decision. We are just asked to start what we know, starting in FY '27. So you could maintain status quo service for 5 years if you started collecting sooner, because, again, you'd have some more reserves. So there's difficult choices. There's no easy answer here. We also know our region is going to continue to grow and needs continue to go up. And, yeah. it's
But
hard.
as that grows, they have to grow as their funding. I mean, we can't,
Well, I think that that's.
And
there's a
that's
lot
where the formula as a whole does grow, right? Because their population, they grow as well, right? Even once the formula is fully implemented, and that's where, in the implementation, some are going down, some are going up, right? So some are going down, some are going up. Once we hit full implementation, again, it takes 5% property tax growth as a whole to cover 4% expense growth. So everybody does have to pay that. The hard part we're in when we talk about ups and downs of levies is the implementation of the formula.
so they will be increased 5% to their levy. Once they're stable.
Dollars.
Once they're stable, we need, and then that's where it also depends, and this is where it gets complicated. And I would invite Aaron, if there's something you're like, I wish Amanda would say this.
Messy.
It is messy because it does also depend on TIF decisions, valuation decisions. We need $1. We start with $1, right? Say we need 40 million in local funding. We have to get to that $1. There's all those factors underneath: the valuations, the tiers, the property tax law, the, all of that determines how much we can collect. And so the growth in the property tax depends.
It clearly shows there needs to be another source of funding.
Clearly.
that-
Regional
The regional source of funding, because this system is so complicated.
Yeah.
And it creates this we, they, unfair, fair, and nobody understands it all. And I think that that's the number one problem with the system is they have gone through how many renditions and to even when they developed that funding formula, I mean, everything's been so complicated that to keep track of it all, I don't think it's fair to the staff, the work they've had to do. We are trying to come up with the best system we can for our citizens that we serve. And how we do that under the constraints of costs, which is every other, is there a city that hasn't had an issue, right? On transit.
That's right.
I just appreciate you being honest, because this
Yeah.
is the first time your predecessor would never come to that podium and just be honest about where we're at and where we're going. And so I do appreciate that. I mean, that would never happen. We've had this conversation, not with you, but with your predecessor, where we knew we were getting to the cliff, and she just would not admit to it in any way, shape, or form. So I do appreciate you just coming clean, and this is where we're at, and this is what we need, and I mean, that,
And
I
I'm never
appreciate
going
that.
to speak, I have a huge respect for people who came before me. But all these conversations just have forced us in a lot of ways to look at all these numbers. And transparency is really important to me. This isn't a secret, right?
Yeah, well,
And
It was for the longest time.
Yes, and I will always assume best intentions of other people.
I think sometimes this shows the difficulty in a regional system where there's a lot of different priorities and how you bring communities together to understand how we all work together and is an equitable system and we all benefit in some way, maybe not just because we ride the bus, but because we provide jobs, we provide transit to those jobs. And so I think we have to understand the importance of that the people that do need this service absolutely rely on it. So how do we get more people to want to be on a system because it's convenient? And people that have a choice, if they have a car, they want convenience, right? That's why they have a car. If you can give them better service, faster service, I think that's why the ridership goes up, I would assume. So
Yeah.
I lean towards ridership, but we will have more conversations and we will bring back on the franchise.
Does Mike or Chris want to?
Oh, Mike and Chris, sorry, we forgot about you
Here to go, okay.
out there and,
Yeah, thank you. This is Mike. I think all things point toward ridership. And why? Number one, I think it's probably more flexible as we move into the future to make modifications. Two, federal funding in ordinary times, and these are not ordinary times, but I would think that federal funding would be more favorably viewed toward ridership, the more people we can get. And three, I've said this on numerous occasions, but again, the zoning ordinance was revised, drafted to support our major corridors. And I think as time moves on and we have more limited resources for tax abatement and TIF, that we be more intentional about focusing on those corridors. Those are my thoughts.
thank you, Mike.
if I could, Mayor?
Yes.
Because I think I'll be asked if we are summarizing your timeline slide, if we could go to that. So we've heard you've got a commission meeting on May 6th. No,
Go back
towards,
to my timeline slide. at
Oh,
the
yeah, I'm sorry.
Sorry, that-
I think it was just a slide or two off.
Yeah, I think mine gives a little
The
bit more.
decision points is what I'm
Yeah,
after.
Decision points, so May 6th, we're going to ask for direction from, we're going to ask for direction from the commission so that we can work and create action items they will vote on May 19th.
Okay, so the challenge that council's probably well aware of, better be, we don't know if we'll have an answer on the property tax system and how that works for you or us.
Yes,
How do you want to handle, or maybe we can talk further about that, because it feels like it might be about 2 weeks too soon
yeah,
to give us enough time. We would probably need, because I really want to lean into Councilwoman Westergaard's question of how do we bring forward the first part of the conversation about what we can afford and what we're willing to tell you we would spend from Des Moines money. And I think
Yeah.
I heard a couple new things that I need to take into consideration. The sunset as a purpose to possibly wean off of is a whole new concept I need to think through.
yeah.
And
Yeah, I appreciate, and remind me, last day of session, May something.
I wouldn't put any money on it.
You think, yeah,
It's
Yeah.
potential it could go through mid-May. That's
Yes.
real. I think we have to treat it like it.
yeah. Per diem runs out, yes. So we know it could go through mid-May, right? So that is, and I would say it really is going to be that May 19th, and we're going to need to create action items by like the 14th, 15th. I'd have to back it out. So again, we'll take input on May 6th, but it'll be that May 14th, 15th, where I'd love to say, give us 2 more weeks. The challenge is we have consultants scheduled to be in town that week. And any move, and again, we will talk about it, we'll take that, into consideration. We're all struggling with the timeline here.
I guess
Yeah.
I'm not telling you to change the schedule now,
Yep,
But what is the
but I
point?
really worry about what value of any input is if they're still in session.
But the concepts of ridership
well,
versus coverage.
the concept of ridership versus coverage, and so I think we can take, we know there's going to be one of 2 options from a budget perspective. And the smaller system, if the legislature does what they're going to do, it's how it impacts you and how it impacts us, right?
But when would you make that change in how you design routes?
Yeah, please.
You have to have the
We
answer.
have, we have started to consider, we know it's unknown if the bill will get passed and when. And so I think one option to give us maximum flexibility, if the legislature is still working on the bill, could be that when we go to design the draft network, we design a system that shows 40% less service so that we're prepared with that scenario if that ends up being something we need to implement.
But you
'Cause that's
still need to know of ridership.
We still need to know ridership versus coverage, and I think from a City of Des Moines budget perspective, it would be helpful to sort of take the property tax bill out of consideration and say, what do you think you can fund? Because what we could end up doing is designing 2 different draft networks, one that reflects the 40% less service, that would be if the property tax bill moves forward as passed, and say, for example, if the commission directs us to design a smaller network, if we take both concepts out for public input, then we have flexibility to implement either one.
I do
Because
see that, yeah.
there's the chance we know that if they don't pass the bill this year, they could come back and do it next year. And so I think we want to make sure we're prepared.
I think that is probably going to be
That's
the
what I think is
scenario.
going to happen.
Yeah,
They're not going to pass anything this year.
So really, the
but you're going to
question
need
is
2 designs.
ridership versus coverage, and then franchise
Franchise
fee
fee
or
or-
not, or what we're doing with
No,
the
no,
franchise.
no, no, no.
Well, there's also,
Hang on a second. It's a total commitment, and then how do we get to that point? So yes, the franchise fee is crucial, but we need to be able to provide you with what annual dollars we think we're going to be able to do. It's going to be on us if the valuations in Des Moines don't hit what they need to be, because DART's still going to ask for the same dollars. It's going to be on us if the franchise fee takes a dip. So we do need to have the conversation I think Linda's asked
need to
for.
have real
That's really
conversation.
focused on what can we commit to DART in total dollar amounts, and then we are comfortable with the two sources that we're going to use to
And
get
the
there.
coverage that we want, whether it be ridership, whether it be.
And we talk about messy, right? So this could add, and this is where staff is, we're trying to figure out how to continue to navigate to create that stability and known. But there's also, a potential third scenario in there, because if we stay with the formula at 49%, right? And you say, you know what, we can't fund 17.9, we can only afford 15 million. Then we have to cut service in Des Moines to line up with that, so that that 49% stays. So that's like a third scenario, right? And that is where you and I have talked about, the timing is both really good and really hard, because in some ways that all these things happening at once, hopefully we'll get some things decided and we can get and move on. On the other hand, there's lots of chicken and egg, but there always is, right? So there's a point where we just need to move forward.
Well, if you probably have both things on the table. Would you eliminate routes, or would you just eliminate times? If we said, we're not going to do the 14.3, we can only do, 11 million or 10 million,
Yeah, I would ask Ricky as the expert how you would approach that.
So that's why ridership versus coverage matters a lot, because if you end up going for coverage and you reduce the budget by a lot, then you would have a lot of routes that still go everywhere, but they're only every 60 minutes. There would be no 30 minutes routes in the network. If you focus on ridership, then you would probably eliminate those 60-minute routes and the routes that go on less strong corridors. So you might only have very few routes, but they come 30 or 15, whatever it is that you can afford within that budget.
Okay.
So that's
You could
So
extend that, the
when we
ridership
have the discussion.
longer.
We're gonna have to have
timeline
another
save
council
a
meeting.
little
Well,
bit of
yeah,
dollars.
right.
Well, it would save dollars, right?
When you say timeline,
So like if it's, if it was every 15 minutes and we're gonna go to every 30 to 40 minutes, that saves dollars.
you would save. That's right. Depends if that's the goal. Yes.
Well, I mean, if we can only afford so much, that's the cut that you're gonna make. You wouldn't, I mean, I guess you would, you could.
You could do
cut-
without, yeah.
You could cut an entire,
Yeah, and that happens very often actually. I've worked in places to build some resiliency plans after COVID where we help them figure out what it would be in like the most dire situations, and you cut a lot of routes, but you still try to keep the main corridors coming as frequently as you can, so people have to walk a really long time, but when they get there, the bus is coming and they can use it. So if your goal is ridership and you have big budget cut, you might end up having a few 15-minute routes and no 30-minute routes or something like that.
how far did you have to walk then to
Oh, it depends specifically where that case would be.
10-minute walk, 15-minute walk?
It could be,
It all depends on the route, which is why, again, there's another phase of public input.
Right.
And if we need to be bringing out a smaller Des Moines network as part of that,
Yeah.
we can.
right.
A question, have we considered, do we have relationships with businesses along the routes? I know at one time, Pleasant Hill, everybody could go to the Hy-Vee parking lot and park there and catch the DART bus.
Yes.
I mean, that's certainly an option if you went to ridership, if we had hubs where people could
Yes.
go park their cars.
Parking rides.
I mean, we
Yes.
got a lot of empty buildings that possibly could be looked at.
Yes.
Where people could park, so you could drive, you could leave my neighborhood, go park in the Walgreens parking lot, and take DART to wherever I wanted.
Yeah, and there's a few different approaches on business partnerships, but we do still have a lot of park and rides. That is one of the components. There's other business partnerships we can talk about as well.
I mean, that's something that we may have to consider, but to me, I don't see how we can make a decision until we know how much money we're going to have. I can't decide to do something if I don't know what my budget is.
That's why
Yep.
I think sooner than later, we will have a conversation on the franchise fee, so that we can see how we can work that, sunset, no sunset.
We got to figure out a dollar amount. I mean, that sounds like what Scott's telling us is.
Yeah, and I need more clarity, obviously, up
Yeah.
there to give you
Well-
a sound
Yeah, I got you.
recommendation.
But I don't know if you're going to be able to give us
There's
some
no-
clarity until next year at this time, maybe.
Right.
In a way, I think we have to be prepared that.
I hate to, say we're going to do something, then next year, everything changes up at the
with our property
Well, yeah,
tax
but that's
reform,
what
and
happens
it's
with
like-
everything we're doing. I mean,
Yeah, no, I get
I
it.
mean, at some point, we've got to define us, and so if it becomes smaller, but we have a system in place that whether we do ridership or coverage, like we said, we can modify off of each one of those. So I think it's a determination that we need probably the discussion on franchise fees sooner than later. And do we want to start sooner, so we put it into reserve, and then we maneuver from there, not knowing what they're doing up there. So at that point, I know that we're way over our original time. Is there anything else?
Thank you. Yes, I really, really appreciate you all taking
Hopefully, we
the
have a clearer
time.
picture as a total council on the complications of,
It's not complicated, it's not DART, but you feel the same
Yeah,
with the
that's right.
cities too, right? So thank you for the time.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Yeah, thank you for staying.